This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
Steve introduced all of us to a demonstration about his Apple, what would become the Apple I. And I saw his demonstration and I go, oh, that's very cool. I had what I used to call the bash and bang test, and I'd load up the program on an Atari 800 or 1200 or whatever I happened to have at the time. And as the program was running, then I would just start pounding on the keys at random, just taking my fist and just banging on the keyboard.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. John Crane published one Atari program through Atari Program Exchange, RPN Calculator Simulator. The program first appeared in the spring 1982 APX catalog, where it was awarded second prize in the Business and Professional Applications category. I'm going to read its entry in the catalog for you. RPN Calculator Simulator by John Crane, recommended for ages 12 and up, written in BASIC. Your kid has made off with your Hewlett-Packard calculator to get through her trig test. You're going through RPN withdrawal. The RPN Calculator Simulator can turn your Atari home computer into an RPN calculator, so you can perform simple or complex mathematical operations without having to write a basic program. Reverse Polish notation, RPN, is a method for doing mathematical operations based on a stack organization. For example, to add 4 and 5 on an RPN calculator, you press the 4 key, the Enter key, and the 5 key. Then you indicate the kind of operation you want by pressing the Add key. Many people tend to prefer this approach over that of using parentheses or doing complex calculations. Using RPN calculator is easy. You enter the value or values you want to work with and the command for the operation you want to perform. The results display in the appropriate stack and memory registers. The program's display screen contains 4 areas of information. 1. The stack of 5 registers. 2. The 20 memory registers. 3. Command syntax reminders. And 4. The value of the command input area. You can use RPN Calculator to perform functions using only one value, for example, sine, cosine, and logarithms, and for those requiring 2 values, for example, addition and subtraction. You can obtain measurements in either radians or degrees. RPN Calculator supports 4 kinds of calculator functions. 1. System commands, such as clearing registers and printing register content on the system printer. 2. Stack operations, such as rolling the stack up or down and swapping the contents of any 2 registers. 3. Mathematical functions, such as arithmetic operations, logarithms, square roots, and trigonomic functions. And 4. Some statistical operations, including arithmetic, means, and standard deviations. The author invites written questions and comments. Review comments. The statistical capabilities are very useful. Programmability would be a welcome feature. The user manual is good for explaining how to operate the program. However, it doesn't discuss the advantages of RPN. Requires Atari Basic Language Cartridge. Optional Atari printer or equivalent printer. Order information. The program was available on cassette, which required 16K of RAM, or diskette, which required 24K of RAM. Either way, it was $17.95. APX catalog number 10105 for the cassette, or 20105 for the disc. John was also one of the founders of the Bay Area Atari Users Group and did some software evaluation for Atari Program Exchange. This interview took place on January 31st, 2016. Can you start first by telling me how you got interested in computers and the Atari specifically, and what was your obsession with HP calculators?
Well, that's a pretty large question. I guess the thing started for me when I was in high school. I've always had an interest in electronics, and I took a lab class in high school. And the instructor there was a guy who had been interested in electronics for years and years and years and was teaching it. That's what he did, basically, was run the lab. So I got interested in it and began to learn some of the fundamentals, some of the underlying things that one has to know but when you're working with electronics.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened I used that for years to have interest for a variety of things. But I think the whole thing with regard to Atari started, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact dates anymore. I have a complete set of the Atari Club. I guess you'd call them just monthly newsletters, and but unfortunately, it's in storage someplace where it's not real easy for me to get to it. So I don't know, these days I just don't have to get it undone. But the dates.
Which Atari Club? I mean, there were many.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Trying to answer a question there is not easy because there were a lot of things going on at once. The Bay Area Atari Users is arguably the first Atari organization that was essentially a users group. Now, there's a group back in Boston that has claimed the same thing, and we've never taken them to task about it, nor have they us. So we're not sure who got the first one going. But we're talking about the very early 1970s. I lived in Northern California and was working doing electronic design for a number of things. If you've ever put a dollar bill into a machine that sucked it in and spit out change for you, that was one of the projects that I worked on, designing the electronics for that. I did that sort of thing, which had nothing to do with computers. I knew zero about computers at that point, but I had a fairly successful career as an electronics design engineer. So I had the background to be interested, and one day someone told me that, there's a club meeting that happens up at Stanford Linear Accelerator Complex, which is a wonderful place to go and investigate in Northern California. And so I said, what's it all about? And they said, they're talking about hobbyists that are building their own computers. And I'm going, that's interesting. I don't think I've got any background in that at all. So let's go see what's going on. So I went there, attended probably half a dozen meetings over a year's period. And Steve Jobs showed up at one of those club meetings. And he had brought a cardboard box with wires and cables and power supply and a PC board with chips and stuff on it, stuff that I knew very little about. Most of my design work was done with discrete electronic devices at that time. Mm-hmm. And Steve introduced all of us to a demonstration about his Apple, what would become the Apple I. And I saw his demonstration and I go, oh, that's very cool. So that got me interested into it, and I started poking around anything I could find for information. And somewhere along the line, and it's misty in my memory, but somewhere along the line, I ran into a guy by the name of Kathy Kappan-Frederick. And Kathy Kappan-Frederick was the manager for a store in Northern California. He was in one of the suburbs surrounding San Jose, California. And he had a store there, and he had just begun to sell pocket calculators, electronic pocket calculators, and this was very, very early in that event also. And so I got really, really interested in that, and ended up making some purchases from him. And after about, I think it seemed to me like it was about a year of operation of that store, then he started to include some of these what would become home computers. You can't call them PCs because, of course, IBM is the one who nailed down that and made that. I think they copyright that term. But these home computers evolved out of the pocket calculators that were being sold. Now, pocket calculators got to be more and more and more powerful, and I had been going to school part-time and working full-time, as I mentioned, designing various kinds of electronic circuitry for different businesses and so forth. And I just lost my thought. One of the things you need to tell your listeners is, by all means, document what you do during your life, because at some point in time, things get a little fuzzy. But at any rate, my resume was starting to be a little bit of an embarrassment, because what I had done was I had joined a company, and I'd worked there on a job shop basis for a number of years. And when they finally decided whether they liked me or not, if they did like me, they would offer me full-time employment. And one of the things I would do about that is I would ask for a raise in my pay. So over a course of about 3 or 4 years, I multiplied my pay substantially, and that gave me sort of the ability to start experimenting with these pocket calculators and so forth. At that same time, because I was jumping from job to job, I decided, this is not going to work out too well. So I started to look for a full-time position somewhere that was very reputable. And at that particular time, Hewlett-Packard was always rated as either 1, 2, or 3 in desirable companies to work for. So I went over there to see if I could get a full-time job that I could stay at for a while. And one of the things that I had sort of picked up along the way with between pocket calculators and the early personal computers was a variety of programming languages. And I think there was, at one time, I'd been working with about 9 or 10 different programming languages. There were everything from the basic, not the basic programming language that came a little later, but the fundamental languages that these computers use, which is called it's working directly with the CPUs. Mm-hmm. And so I had started to write some code early on. And at that same time, products were showing up on the marketplace, and one of those products was VisiCalc, and I had no idea what that did. So all these sort of things, the meeting at Stanford, meeting Cappy and Frederick, working in the industry, all of this, and then my introduction to pocket calculators. I remember. While I was still going to school and I was taking physics, HP was putting out the HP 35, which was their very first, what they called electronic, electronic brain kind of a thing. I don't know. They had a whole bunch of sales pitches that they gave people. And I remember working all summer to earn the $400 that they wanted for the pocket calculator HP 35. So I had an HP 35, and of course that was not programmable, that was dedicated. But from the HP 35 evolved into a whole host of different calculators, and I started learning to program them. So here comes programming into my life, and as the pocket calculators began to become more and more popular, professionals, engineers primarily, I think, began to use these pocket calculators and program them to do various jobs that they were specialists in. And I remember hearing a story about one guy who was a engineer with one of the local water retention districts, and he was using it to do stuff that they had previously had to pay timeshare on stand-up computers, the ones that occupied a whole business or a whole room. And he is actually doing the same work now with some of his pocket calculators. And of course, Texas Instrument and Hewlett-Packard were head-on-head in competition at that time. And as I began to learn how to program and was introduced to VisiCalc, I was working at HP by that time about 3 years, I think. I started with them in 1980, so it was about 1983. And we had all of these professionals that were using programmable pocket calculators now to do professional work. And now, sort of sneaking in the back door, came these varieties of home computers. And so in having a friend of Cappy Cap and Frederick, who was running the store that sold all this hardware, he and I got together one day, and I said, these pocket calculators are just not powerful enough to do stuff like graphics and some of the more CPU intensive kinds of functions. And I said, but some of these home computers are getting fairly powerful, and there were several on the market that would handle graphics, a basic, very, very fundamental level graphics, but still way better than pocket calculators. And so, and I'm trying to remember exactly what computer I had back at that time. I must have had about 4 or 5 of them running at home about that time. But I was drawn always to the Atari products because they were the only home computer that did honest to goodness color. There were other computers like the Apple who proposed to do color, but what they were really doing is they were taking advantage of artifacting in black and white and color televisions, and they were sending black and white signals that was being modulated. And it's kind of like looking at the wheel of a rotating wheel that has spokes in it. And pretty soon you begin to see these flashes of color coming out of this rotating wheel, and that's just the turning on and turning off of black and white. And that's the way Apple did color back in those days. And of course the problem with that is that it's highly dependent on the display device. In one display device, you set it a pulsating black and white signal, and it showed up green on the screen. You put it on another TV that has a little bit different bandwidth, and suddenly that same signal looks orange or red or something else. Right. So it wasn't true. It wasn't true standard color, but the Atari was, and so that's what sort of drew me to that. And so I thought, well, look, here we have a whole bunch of these engineers that have written software in their professions for pocket calculators. And I said, but you know what? These personal or independent home computers were way more powerful. So I thought, well, that would be kind of fun to write something that people were trying to use on their pocket calculators onto the home computers. And this satisfied one of Cappy Cap and Frederick's objectives for his store, because he was trying to sell home computers, and he was trying to move from the pocket calculator market into the home computer market, because, of course, the home computers at that time were very, very expensive. I think I paid $1,000 for the CPU of my first Atari computer, the 800. And then, of course, your floppy drives were each $400 or $500 a piece, and you wanted at least 1 or 2 of them. And printers were very expensive back then. I remember my first printer was I can't remember the manufacturer right offhand, but it was a common one, and I think I paid about $700 for the printer. So an entire system back in those days. And remember, this was an 8-bit microprocessor-based, very simple design by today's standards, and so you're paying $4,000 or $5,000 for a complete setup, for one of these things. Yeah. But that was what there was. So one of the things that I did then at that point, I had started working at Hewlett Packard, and so I was what they call a learning products engineer, which means you have 2 sets of skills. One is the computer knowledge, and the other is the ability to teach. And so that was pretty much my schedule, what I did for Hewlett Packard. I was there a total of 24 years, retiring in 2004. And so coming into that company, I wanted to teach in the company, and that was what I was studying in school, so I thought that's what I had to do. But I sure enjoyed the electronics part of it. And at that time, that product of VisiCalc came out, and I recognized immediately that this allowed people who don't normally think of themselves as programmers, allowed them to actually create from scratch, essentially, using that product, numeric processing. And of course, the market just flew open. People who worked in the manipulation of money of various kinds, I mean, they just took to that like crazy. And so I thought, well, at that point, I think the calculator I had at that time was an HP 41X, I think at that time, which is, I still own one of those actually, and it's still functional, and I use it from time to time. And it was programmable, and you could power a printer with it, and you could power a hard disk with it as well. There was a technology of communication over wires that HP had come up with, which was essentially an 8-bit data transfer cabled sort of thing, but the bits were sent in serial, so it was very slow processing, but with a very small calculator. And even to this day, that calculator is nice and compact. So much so that they sent it on one of the space missions as the backup computer for there. But at that point, I had taken the exposure to VisiCalc from HP, knowing Captain Frederick and his store, and providing him with things that he needed to try to convert people from the programmable calculators, for which they had tons and tons of software that they had created themselves, convert some of that into something for these new quote-unquote home computers. I took upon myself to create the spreadsheet program for the HP 41. And I still have the original code here. I have the original instruction book for it, and everything's just sitting here. I approached Hewlett-Packard to ask them if they would like to sell that product along with their HP 41s as a piece of software that they could buy. I had a functional version of the software, and I went with them, and they said, "Well, let's see. We'll talk to our legal staff about it." So they talked to the legal staff about it, and they said, "No, we don't see any real value in having a spreadsheet that can be operated, with somebody's the computer that's in somebody's vest pocket." And I thought that was pretty narrow-minded. But at any rate, they said, "No, we're really not interested in that." And so then I said, "Well," I said, I'm the author of it. I created it from scratch. I said, "May I sell it under my own name?" And they said, "No." So you signed that right away when you joined the company. So there it was, and here it sits. I'm the only person on the planet that uses it, I think, and I'm thinking back to Steve Wozniak, and when Steve was working at Hewlett-Packard. He was there just a couple of years before I joined HP, and he did the same exact thing, only with a piece of hardware, and he approached them with a little thing that nobody had ever heard of called a floppy disk. And he approached HP with that, and they told him to fly a kite, which he did, and now is one of the most the wealthiest men on the planet because of their short-sightedness, in my opinion. But anyway, I stayed with HP for quite a while because I was working in the educational side of it, and so the playing around with computers and software and so forth was sort of a hobby or an alternate activity. However, there's a wonderful school, junior college, that's right there in Northern California. Foothill Junior College District is two schools, Foothill College and De Anza College. And so one of the engineers that I worked with in HP said, "Oh, you know what you ought to do? You ought to get a little extra money there. Go on over to to De Anza and see if they'll let you teach any of their computer classes. So I went over there, and that started a 25-year career teaching computer science, starting in 1981, I think it was. I worked actually a year longer than I worked at HP, teaching evening classes, and taught everything from. When I first started there, they still had punch card readers in their lab, in the computer lab. Anybody that had been in that school around that time remembers that lab. There must have been 10 or 20 of those punch card readers all around the computer lab, and I remember the phasing out of those things and moving to disk-oriented data manipulation and storage, and so that was wonderful because that gave me mad money for the mini-home computers. And I think at one time, you've already talked to a gentleman by the name of Jerry Falkenham. Jerry and I met at the Atari Bay Area Users Group, and he asked me programming questions. Jerry's background was hardware engineering, and he wanted to write this program that you've already talked to him about, and he didn't understand how to do programming because he had no background in it at all. And the only background I had was the previous 5 years of playing around myself and learning to program. Formally, I've never had a class in computer programming that I didn't teach, and so anyway. Where was I going with that? Oh, let's see. So the career teaching in the evening was really great because it gave me the opportunity to learn more stuff, which I then turned around and taught, and I watched the evolution of those, and that brings me back to how many computers I think I had at home. Jerry will tell you. At one point, I had a home with a room that I had pre-wired for computers. We bought and had the home built, and I knew I was going to have a place to store a lot of computers. So I think I had about 9 or 10 different machines. That had the TRS-80 from Radio Shack. I had, of course, a lot of Atari stuff there. I had written some software for the APX program that Atari had, where people, just regular everyday people, could just submit programs that they'd written. And one of the things I had done on the side, along with teaching at De Anza College and so forth, was I was evaluating submissions from people who were teaching. Who were creating these awful programs like Jerry's, for example.
Oh, really? How'd you get that? So Atari was sending you software to look at?
Well, one of the hubs, if you will, for all of the interactions that I did with various different sources and opportunities was the Users Club. Jerry came up to me at a Users Club meeting, and after the meeting was over, he grabbed me and said, I got some questions for you. I've been doing some of this programming stuff, and I don't know how to do this. And he needed me to teach him about loops and how to do interaction with the printer and so forth. And so I had a lot of these opportunities, and one of them was that the fellow who was running the Apex program, and you're going to have to go back in your notes about Jerry Falkenham, because I don't remember his name right offhand, or Clyde Spencer, who was one of the co-founders of the club with me. Mm-hmm. I think they knew those people better than I did, and what I ended up doing was they approached me and said, can we send you submissions of these programs, and would you take a look at the code and make sure that they function properly? And just as an example, one of the things that I would find in those things often is I had what I used to call the bash and bang test, and I'd load up the program on an Atari 800 or 1200 or whatever I happened to have at the time. And as the program was running, then I would just start pounding on the keys at random, just taking my fist and just banging on the keyboard. And if that dumped the program, then we sent it back to them and said, you have to make this bulletproof. You have to make your software so that it's almost indestructible. It would be okay if it just flipped over to a routine that said, illegal input or something like that. But it can't crash. It can't cease operating. And so from the Bay Atari Users Group, Jerry approached me on writing his financial evaluation program there, which turned out to be a monster program. The biggest problem he had in the end was how to get it all onto a small floppy disk of 160 kilobytes. And so he ended up with multiple floppies that contained that program and all the memory that the Atari machines could use, which was 64 kilobytes, 64,000 characters. That's the biggest memory that it would take, and having that kind of functionality on a home machine was very difficult because of the limitations in the hardware. But they evolved also. So I got involved with Apex through the users group. I got involved with Jerry through the users group. Captain Frederick was a member of the users group. He wasn't one of the founders, but he was one of the people that was there from before the beginning, actually, because he finally ended up selling that store in Cupertino and getting out of that business. But anyway, then another opportunity I had was Lon. You may know Lon Poole. He was a writer.
Yes, I know that.
He wrote a book called My Atari Computer, and one of the project managers from the I'm drawing a blank on what company it was that produced that book. See, I'm looking at it now. I can't remember what organization it was that had that book written. But anyway, My Atari Computer was the first comprehensive book that told people in depth how to program those computers. And they approached me because they didn't have anybody that knew how to first of all, knew how to write, which of course I had been doing with HP for a number of years by then. And the interface between the Ataris and printers was their main concern. So they had a chapter in there that they wanted me to take a look at. A couple of people had taken a shot at writing for it and hadn't done a real good job on it. So basically I took that and then I essentially rewrote the chapter, and that was my claim to my name to fame for publication. In my career, I'd ended up writing more than 200 technical manuals for Hewlett-Packard, but of course my name was not on any of them because you write that, you sign that away when you join the company also. Right. But at least there in Lon Poole, I got in that book. It's kind of funny that he gave me copies of that book, to just have and hold, and over the years I had loaned all of them out. So here, about 5 years ago, I said, this is ridiculous. I don't even own a copy of the book that I helped write. So I went out on eBay and I actually paid money to buy a copy of that book. So anyway, that gave me the opportunity to get a little bit of notoriety. And I had formed a business called John Crane Computing to handle stuff just like that, so I could do it legally. So they gave me credit for that, and that was kind of fun. But my point of this rambling is just all of these things were going on, either if not at once, but in rapid succession. It went from meeting a guy who was selling pocket calculators to the evolution of the pocket calculator into a home computer, and the amazing explosion of products that came out of that. For a couple of years, I had some computers that were copies of other computers that had been done in England. Mm-hmm. The Radio Shack got into the computer. Atari had manufactured a whole series of machines, and then there were offshoots of that, whose names I have long forgotten. But it allowed me to have a wonderful career, and I've met an amazing number of people. I still get email from time to time from various people around who have seen my name on stuff. They may have stumbled across an APX program and seen my name in it or something, but it's been quite a ride.
Nice. That's awesome. How did RPN Calculator Simulator, do you remember how well it sold?
It didn't sell at all because I couldn't sell it. I had approached HP, and because I wrote it during the years in which I was covered by their, I forget what they call that, but it's you can't talk about it unless we say so.
Right, an NDA or something. Okay,
yeah,
but I'm confused because it was in the catalog and it sold for $17.95, and I'm looking at the catalog here, and it's there.
Well, what happened was I actually rewrote it, and I rewrote it after I had left HP. Actually, it was while I was in the employment of De Anza College, actually. So I rewrote it on their time while I was being paid money for that job. So that I'm told by the legal beagles that means that's a different business environment. So I'm no longer bound by HP, by what I signed with HP, as long as I didn't refer to Hewlett Packard anywhere in the product. And so I just thought, well, okay, if I can release it there, this wasn't something that was made available to the world as a Atari, as a what am I trying to say here? I guess it wasn't released to the world as a product of mine that I had created for the industry that typically used those kinds of products. Mm-hmm. It was released under the APX logo. And yes, I was the author of it, and I was a programmer of it. But what I had done is I had, during my time working with De Anza College, I had rewritten the program from the ground up. And so I have a copy of the original program for the HP41, and then rewrote the program completely for the Atari while I was being employed by Atari. So
by De Anza, you mean?
Well, yeah, by De Anza, but because I received a small portion of the sales in the APEX program, then I was working for them as well as a consultant.
Oh, I see.
So working as an instructor for De Anza, working at HP as a learning products engineer, and then working for APEX as a just an independent contractor. That evidently satisfies the law in terms of eminent domain, I think is what it is.
Well, I'm glad you managed to get it out there in the world, despite the fact that HP was reluctant.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that in those days you have to understand what an incredible change of it's an entire world, really, as we know these days. I mean, how many 16-year-olds do you know that spend a lot of time in front of a game machine? Mm-hmm. Just to the point that if they don't, they're considered to be strange. So it's an entire world, really. And back in those days, the world was not well defined. We had a young man that came to the computer club. And he was very much a male in his early 20s, but his claim to fame, and he chose us as a computer club to demonstrate his claim to fame, was he manufactured and used dresses, women's looking dresses, mm-hmm. For his regular everyday attire. And so he would come to the computer club meetings dressed with these dresses. These were male-oriented dresses, but he would have skirts and dresses and blouses of various kinds. And of course, keep in mind that this was the 70s and 80s, and social events being what they were for those times sort of opened up the world to a lot of different kinds of thinking. And he had chosen us. And that's just how esoteric computers were back then. I mean, they were 99.9% of the population of the planet had no idea what they were, what they did, and why they should care, and yet there were the 10%, the 1/10% or fewer of the people who had images of future possibilities. The Steves of Apple were certainly two or more of them. The people that started APX program for Atari were certainly part of them. The Atari company itself was oriented towards gaming more than anything else. But then people like Jerry Falkenhand, exposed them to possibilities that stretched them at the time. I mean, that was just, to use a computer at home to do your taxes, and get the same or better results than the government could get with all of their multi-billion dollars of machines. That concept, you would talk to people about it who didn't know anything about computers, and you'd get this glassy-eyed stare, as you were talking, and you could just tell that there was just no way they were able to link this new product that was, really on everybody's minds these days through, articles in various magazines and so forth. And it was just a world that was massively different and becoming more and more different all the time.
Yeah. Awesome.
Go ahead. I spent a lot of time talking, and you may have some things that you want to say.
No, I think you've answered all my questions.
Super.
Yeah. Well, I guess my only lingering thing is you have a basement full of Atari newsletters, some of which probably haven't been scanned yet, and I'm wondering if when you find those, if you might lend them to me, and so I can make sure that they're all archived.
Sure. I've actually made them available to other people, but I don't think anyone has done a real good job of covering the whole set. I have from the very first one, and there are a couple that are missing through the way, but I probably got 3 or 4 years worth of these things. They come out once a month. There were a couple of months that I'm missing, but not very many. And are you familiar with the computer warehouse that's in Northern California, where they have all the hardware set up for people to go in? And
like the computer barn or something, that one?
I think that's what they call it now. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I approached them with the offer to let them make copies of these things and keep them, and they just never followed up with me on it. And I don't know if they weren't interested or maybe in the transition of ownership of that that it didn't happen. But if you have an interest in that area, I'd be happy to work with you on it.
Great. Yes, I'm very interested. I've scanned thousands and thousands of pages of Atari-related material, and I like to make sure that there's a digital copy of that. I uploaded it to the Internet Archive, and then it's there for everyone to enjoy. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think that's exactly the ideas that we had in your talking with Clyde Spencer. Incidentally, there were 4 of us that started the club. Just to set this record straight, there's been a lot of people saying one thing or another. Clyde Spencer and myself were 2 of them, and then there were 2 other people who I've completely lost contact with, and I know that you have their names now. It was a man and a woman, and their names are gone in my memory, but. I know that Clyde is still in touch with the 2 of them. So those are the 4 of us that actually were responsible for starting this. And there were a lot of sort of hanger-oners and a lot of people that were involved in a very productive way with us. But we had the initial image of making stuff available to the average person on a hey, let's all get together and see how this stuff works kind of a basis. That really was something that we and a number of other people across the country began to realize. And I think would really like to see those people get their recognition for that, because back in those days, we're talking about the early 70s. Back in those days, having that kind of foresight, and I'm not saying I had it either. We sort of fed off each other, so there was a lot of synergy going on between the four of us in different ways and from different perspectives. All four of us were very kind of different kinds of people, and it was an amazing thing. And I really wish those other three of people were to be better known by people. But maybe a little exposure through what you're doing is going to help.
Doing what I can.
Yeah, that's great. That's all we can do, right?
That's right. Well, thank you so much, John. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, you're very welcome. And anytime I can be of help, just you've got my number.
All right. Great. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.